Hey there, crewmates! Gabe from Nexus Core here with another One Piece deck profile. If you've watched my most recent meta-analysis of a recent tournament with 128 participants, you would know that Doflamingo and the Warlord deck have become a bit of a breakout star over the past couple days, so because of that, I've wanted to check out the deck for myself and see how well it actually holds up. And I've actually been having quite a lot of fun with this list. I've been experimenting with blue quite a bit, and I think this deck is actually quite neat, and it has a lot of interesting interactions, and generates a ton of advantage, which is something I love in my deck. So I think I can see why this deck is doing as well as it is, and because of that, I am now ready to go over the profile and show you what I've had brewing. So first, we have the leader, Donquixote Doflamingo, who is your average mono leader, 5,000 power, 5 life, special attribute, who's a warlord and a part of the Donquixote Pirates. His effect is, while he has Dawn 2 attached, when he attacks, you may pay an additional 1, reveal the top card of your deck. If that card is a 7 Warlord of the Sea character with a cost of 4 or less, you may play it as rested. So what's really nice about this is for an effective cost of 3, you can play a card of cost 4 or less, and as you can already see, there are a lot of cards with 4, and even more with less than 4, so you effectively get to cheat out a card with a +1 and get extra Dawn out of it because you pay 3 to get 4. As well, though, because 2 of the Dawn are attached, you don't even effectively pay 3 because you can turn Doflamingo into a 7k attacker while also getting advantage, which is what makes this card very, very potent. So, going on to the main deck, we are running 4 copies of Perona, who is on place. Check the top 5 cards of your deck, and you may put them in any order at the top or bottom of your deck. So this is amazing going first, because even if you only get the 1 Dawn out, if you can open Perona, you can sculpt your next turn to guarantee that you can use Doflamingo's effect, because even if you go first, turn 2 you'll have 3 Dawn attached to 2 Doflamingo, and then pay 1 to play the card that you have sculpted with Perona. She just adds an obscene amount of consistency, so you can almost always hit your Doflamingo triggers. Next, we are running 4 copies of the Blocker Law. It's a 1/1 blocker, so it's easy to play, and he's also a Warlord, so he is another card you can cheat out with Doflamingo. We are running 4 copies of Alvida, who is a 2/3 striker with counter 2 from the Buggy Pirates. Her effect is Dawn 1. When attacking, you may trash a card from your hand to return one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less to their hand. You only run this because she's counter 2000. There is quite literally no other reason to be running her. As you can see, there aren't any events in this deck. The reason is because this deck actually can use a bit of Dawn, so you do wind up tapping out completely. So even keeping 1 or 2 Dawn up for an event can be a bit tricky, and if you leave 1 Dawn up, well, Alvida is free, because all of the 1 Dawns, while they have additional effects, also have counter 2000, which is what Alvida needs, and everything else can cost too much because Doflamingo himself costs 3, and I don't really see a lot of need to run them. As you'll come to see, there are a lot of blockers in this deck, so running a lot of counters I don't even think is that necessary. Next, we are running 4 copies of the 3-cost Doflamingo, who is a 3/4 special attribute, counter 1000, who is a Warlord and a Donquixote Pirate, so he is also cheatable by the leader. So he is also a blocker, and on play has the same effect of Perona. Check top 5, put in any order on top or bottom. It is another avenue of consistency. It is another card you can cheat out with Doflamingo because he's a Warlord, and he's another blocker. So all around a fantastic card for the deck that is easily a 4 of. Next, despite not being a Warlord, we are running a sizable Pacifista package. So if you haven't seen my blue-purple Kaido list, Sentomaru is a 3/4 slasher with counter 1000, who, while 1 Dawn is attached, you can pay 2, so the inverse of Doflamingo. During the main phase, you can play a Pacifista with the cost of 4 or less from your deck, and then shuffle. So while this isn't a Warlord, there aren't a lot of amazing Warlords, if I am being honest. So there's still some space generally. This is probably what I would be cutting if I wanted to run events, and I think this avenue is a lot better for maintaining board presence. So Sentomaru is great because if you're going second, is usable turn 3, because when you have 6 Dawn, you pay 3 to play him, attach 1 to him for 4, and tap 2 for the full 6 to get out a Pacifista. And in the late game, when you have 9 or 10, you can even play Sentomaru, and provided you sculpt the previous turn, you could use Doflamingo and Sentomaru the same turn, because that would cost a effective total of 9, counting the attaching. And for the Pacifistas, we are running 4 copies of the blocker one. A lot of people, we're running 6 copies, I'm sorry, because you can run more than 4. I'm not running the 6k vanilla just because I don't think the 1000 extra power is that necessary. The deck can hit solid numbers because most things have 5 power anyways, but also I really don't think it's that worth it. Because again, this deck isn't really running events. You want the defense, so this is another 6 blockers you can get that you can also directly tutor from Sentomaru. And another reason why I'm running both the blocker as well as the package to begin with is the deck is running Bartholomew Kuma, who, unlike the Pacifistas and the Sentomaru, is fortunately a Warlord, so this is a card that you can cheat out with the leader's effect. Kuma is a 4/5 striker with 1000 counter, who is a Warlord and a Revolutionary. He is a blocker, and on KO you can play a Pacifista with 4 or less from your hand. So one of my personal issues with Pacifistas in lists is when you draw into them and you don't want to, but because of Kuma, it's not that you want to draw into all of your Pacifistas, but it makes it hurt a lot less because you can block with Kuma and then play a Pacifista for 2 blockers, which is just wonderful. And you can, as I said, you can play him with Doflamingo's effect, and he's a 5,000 attacker, so he's even a decent attacker, and he's a solid target to attack because based on how much advantage this deck can generate, because Doflamingo is a +1, you go +1 on your turn anyways. If you have Sentomaru, God help your opponent, because Sento plus Doflamingo is +2 on top of your draw for turn, and there are also other ways of doing it, so you can get so much advantage that your opponent is going to be scared and going to want to attack into your characters, and attacking with Kuma and goading your opponent into attacking into him is a good strategy to cheat out the Pacifista. So I do really like the defensive avenue this deck can go. Moving on, though, we're running 4 copies of Gecko Moria, who is a 4/5 special attribute, counter 1000, who is a Warlord and Thriller Bark Pirate, whose effect is on place. You can add a Warlord or Thriller Bark Pirate with a cost of 4 or less other than himself from trash to hand. So this is free recycling, and it's more plussing that this deck has access to, because if you cheat this out with Doflamingo, getting Moria is a +1, and Moria gets a card to make it a +2, and again, if Sento's there, you just want +3 without even factoring in your draw for a turn. So he gets you a lot of advantage, and again, he's a 5,000 attacker, and yeah, Gecko Moria is a great addition to this deck. Next, we are running 4 copies of Marshall D. Teach, who is a 4-cost 4,000 special attribute, counter 1,000, 7 Warlords and Blackbeard type, whose effect is on play. Return 1 character with a cost of 3 or less to its owner's hand. Now, this offers a decent amount of control, which I do like. This is one that I'm a bit iffy on, but because a lot of decks do like to run low-to-the-ground blockers, and there are a decent amount of red decks and a lot of green decks that have low-to-the-ground blockers, forcing your opponent to spend more resources to use them or get rid of something that you hope they don't block with is always good. My one iffiness with him is that he only has 4,000 power, which I don't like, because Gecko Moria is 5, so he needs Dawn to attack a leader. But again, you can, if your opponent's first turn play is to play a blocker, you can cheat out Teach to bounce their blocker and sync in with Doflamingo, which is always nice. So Teach is a solid card, and I'm glad he's in the deck, but he's just not one of my favorite inclusions. Next, we are running, obviously, 4 copies of Dracula Mihawk, who is a 4-cost 5,000 slash attribute, counter 2,000, and 7 Warlord of the Sea type, whose effect is Dawn 1 on attack, draw 2, and trash 2 from hand. I'm going to be completely honest here. Mihawk is a fantastic card, but in my experience, most of the time, I really only use him for the 2,000 shield. He isn't bad to cheat out, but because he doesn't directly generate you advantage, the sculpting by cycling 2 is good, but you aren't increasing the amount of cards you have, and it's, because of that, it doesn't really That's why I don't end up playing it a whole lot, and I really use it for the 2000. He's solid to cheat out, of course, because he's not a bad card. But if I play Doflamingo and go into, say, Teach, I get rid of a blocker, or Moria, I get a card to hand, or Doflamingo, I get a blocker and later turn Sculpting. So Mihawk just doesn't do as much defensively as a blocker or in terms of generating advantage as something like Moria. He's a great card, and I'm glad he's here, but he's really only there for the 2000. And another thing about the sculpting that can be weird is because you are looking a lot at what you are drawing into with the size 3 Doflamingo and Perona. You thinking about that can make things kind of awkward because you have to think about the right line of, do I want to attack with Dofi to trigger the leader's effect and then attack with Mihawk and vice versa. So thinking about that means I don't really wind up using his effect a whole lot, but the 2000 counter and being a size 4, so he's cheatable with Doflamingo, makes him still a fantastic addition to the deck. And if you do have a lot of bricks in your hand, debricking is, of course, always good. Next, one of the most obvious ones is Boa Hancock. 4 cost, 5,000 power, special attribute, counter 1,000, 7 Warlord of the Sea, and Akuja Pirate. She is a blocker who, with 1 Dawn attached, when she attacks or blocks, you can draw a card if there are 5 or less in your hand. Just an absolutely fantastic card to include in the deck. I really don't know what to say that isn't just obvious by reading her effect. She is cheatable by Dofi. She has a good stat line, generates more advantage. Because it's Boa, she is going to be an attack target. She is definitely a kill on sight card as she comes in as rest because of Doflamingo leader's effect. So even though she isn't active to block with, she has a pseudo blocker because of how much people are going to want to attack her anyways. And if she isn't killed outright or you play her from your hand, she can just generate you advantage so easily. Just a phenomenal card that sings with the deck so beautifully. And next onto the big cards, we are running 2 copies of Doflamingo, who's a 7/7 special, Warlord and Donquixote Pirate. On play, return in character with a cost of 7 or less to the owner's hand. And then Mihawk, who is a 9/9/7 Warlord, and on play, you return a character with a cost of 7 or less to the bottom of the owner's deck. I'm running these 2 because the meta, thanks to Kid and Kaido, especially with the support from the Film Start deck, the meta involves a lot of big, beefy boys, so having answers to them is genuinely very important. Mihawk can hit both kings and queens and all of that, and being 9,000 means he can hit the 8-drop Kid without needing Dawn attached. Doflamingo can also target the same cards. It's not as great. You don't want to bounce, say, the blocker queen because you don't want them to get more draws, but you can bounce the king so they can't use a 7,000 attacker. He can also hit the 7-cost Kid if somebody's playing that, so they lose out on a blocker. And he is 7 cost, and 7,000 power, so if you give him 1 Dawn, he can hit the 8-cost Kid. This deck can definitely struggle against tanky builds like that, so being able to have the answers to them is important. I only run the 4, though, because thanks to cards like the 3 Doflamingo and Perona, you can know when you're drawing into them, and also all of the ways you can increase consistency by using Sentomaru to deck them with the Pacifistas and so on. You can see them often enough, and frankly, running more can be a bit clunky as they don't have any counters. They're also part of why I'm running the 4-cost Mihawk, because if you're playing against something like Zoro or Law, where they're in red and they have a lot of low-cost cards, you're not really going to want to use these because your main deck can hit their cards anyways. So in those matchups, these winds up being the discard fodder from Mihawk's effect because, again, they don't have counter, where most other things in this build do, or at the very least have blocker to compensate. But they are quite good cards. These just exist to shore up weaknesses as opposed to advance the deck's strengths. So this deck, for everything that it is a lot more consistent, even if you're going into a turn blind. So what I mean by that is Doflamingo and Perona, you can guarantee basically pulling off Doflamingo's effect, but based on the ratio of warlords to non-warlords, even if you don't know what's coming up, you still have a decent chance of success. This deck is running 4, 8, 12, 18, and then because while these are warlords, they're too big for Doflamingo's effect. 22 out of your 50 cards are not usable by Doflamingo's effect, so you have a just under a 60% chance of achieving Doflamingo's effect if you do it completely blind. And again, you run 8 cards, so you don't have to do it blind, so that you have a 20% chance of just top decking one that will make it so you don't have to do it without knowing. And then also don't forget just drawing into other ones as the game goes on, because it's not like you're drawing one card per turn. So this deck is very, very consistent, and a lot of the time you use Doflamingo's effect. More often than not, if you you not be using his effect if other costs turn out to be more important, as opposed to not being sure if you are going to sculpt your turn. And sculpting just makes the deck very consistent, and you, as I keep saying, you generate so much advantage. The deck isn't explicitly aggro, but by how quickly you can fill a board with Doflamingo and Sentomaru's effect, you can really just get a lot of decently sized attacks in before your opponent is able to do anything. And a lot of cards make up for themselves in terms of advantage and blocking. And yeah, this deck is both the biggest criticism I think with the deck is it just does not have massive numbers to its name. The biggest things are the Mihawk and Doflamingo, which not bad by any means. They have on play, so after a single effect they turn out to be vanillas. So the deck can struggle with churning out high valued attacks, so that's why I run a lot of blockers to ensure being able to prolong a game as I slowly whittle them down, because not many decks can generate resources to the degree that this deck can. Doflamingo is basically a +1 every turn. Sento is a +1 every turn for the most part, because you run 6 Pacifistas. And combined, you can just, as I keep saying, you can keep getting cards, where other decks are going to just be slowly whittled out. And yeah, I think that is going to wrap it up. I think this is a quite good deck, and I can see why it is in the upper echelon of the tiers. I think I would probably place it as the 3rd or 4th best deck, just because I think it has a great matchup against everything in the lower tiers, but not a great matchup in the things against the higher tiers, because, as I said, the deck can answer Kid and Kaidos with Doflamingo and Mihawk, but those answers aren't perfect, and there aren't many great ones. And if your opponent has like 2 Kaidos or has a decent amount of Kings, and well, those cards are vanillas too, because they're on play, they hit a lot higher numbers. So this deck can definitely be countered if your opponent can control the game at a decent pace. So that's why I think this is in the same vein as a gatekeeper deck. So it keeps the things that can't beat it in the lower tiers, but it isn't as great in its worst matchups are for unfortunately decks that were already doing great regardless. But the deck is quite fun. I think you should all try it out for yourself. As somebody who came from a Vanguard background, I think it's just kind of funny how in the game that has events and stages, so spells and field spells, this is still the deck that just doesn't run any, and it's just all characters all the time. So this is a neat deck, and I think it's really interesting, and I do think that everybody should try it out, especially if you like your resources, and it's been performing quite well, so I think it's definitely one worth exploring. But I have been talking long enough, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you soon.